Thank you very much for that, Dave. That was great. I'm not sure if Kiwis live in barns or not, but I've got a story or two to tell about barns this morning. And of course, that's based on a story that Jesus told. And you'll find the text in Luke chapter 12. You'll also find the outline of the message that I have for you this morning in your bulletin. You'll find it there as well as that letter, that fabulous letter from the student from Center Hastings that saw the sign, and that's going to become part of the sermon this morning. So you'll see how I put that in a little later on. But Luke chapter 12, verses 13 to 21, in the season in which Pastor West and I did the series on the Sermon on the Mount, of course that's over now, and so in this post Sermon on the Mount season, I'm going to pick up some of my favorite stories that Jesus tells, because I think as I get older, I see more and more the power of storytelling. And that comes, of course, from Jesus himself, who his best teaching moments were because of the use of parables and stories. So here's a story from an interaction with a person that came to him in Luke chapter 12. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself, but is not rich towards God." Lord, would you help us again this day to learn what you were trying to say and what you were trying to teach in your interaction with this person all those centuries ago. May it be real and alive to us today. And we'll ask for this through your precious name. Amen. As I have traveled along the back roads of Ontario again this summer, I have noticed something which makes me sad. I feel sad every time I see an old barn no longer being used and literally falling apart because somebody's dream is dead. One day, not too long ago, there was a prosperous farmer whose farm was flourishing and needed a bigger barn. The community came together and helped with the barn raising. Over the years, cattle were protected from the wiles of winter, and the mow of that barn was filled with hay and straw for every winter. Now, 50, 70, maybe 100 years later, the barn is falling down, and you can see right through the barn because of the deterioration of the walls. The decaying barns of eastern Ontario are really a signal that a whole way of life in our society has died. The stats go like this. At the turn of 1900, 97% of Canadians lived on farms. At the turn of the last century, the 21st century, 3% of Canadians lived on farms. A flip exactly of the 97%. When I worked for Harvey Pilgrim on his farm in the late 1960s, on the Queen's Line, just north of Renfrew, south of Cobden, for those of you who know the Ottawa Valley, 20 to 25 dairy cows was a pretty good operation. You could support a family on 20-25 dairy cows. As you know, my niece Heidi Wilson married Tyler Dunnan just down the road on 62 Highway, whose family operates Dunnan Farms. Tyler told me 2 weeks ago they're milking 300 cows. That's a far cry from the 25 cows that I went to help milk at 6:30 in the morning, listening to the radio station as the cows were milked, and we carried the milk to the milking room, where the cooler was, and waited for the milk truck to come. I often say to Karen when I see one of those old barns, I wish they'd just tear down the whole barn and pay their last respects to a day gone by. Don't leave the thing there just looking terrible. Well, Jesus tells a barn story too, and it involves someone tearing down their barns, but it's a very different story than the one that I've told you this morning. It's called the parable of the rich fool, and it's a word of warning. Jesus tells this story in response to a request that comes from a person in the crowd who was listening to Jesus teach on this particular day. Teacher, he says, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. Now, while on the surface this might seem to be a legitimate request, there is evidence that this person was displaying greed. And here's why. Jewish law provided for the proper division of an inheritance. This isn't a case where one person got everything and the other person got nothing. We know of stories like that, where 100 years ago, someone got the farm and everybody else in the family got nothing. And that isn't one of those kinds of stories. What it looks like is that he is not asking Jesus to discuss the merits of his claim to more of the estate, which he already would have received under Jewish law, because there was a standard provision as to how that should happen. He's just asking that Jesus unilaterally just tell this person to give him more, from a brother who isn't even able to speak for himself because he's not part of the picture. It's a money grab. It's, I want more, and he's got it, so therefore tell him to give it to me. Which then sparks Jesus' answer. That's always important in Jesus' story. There's always a reason why he tells the story that he tells. And in this case, Jesus smells greed. Man, he says, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you? Then he said, watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Man, a woman's life does not consist in the abundance of his or her possessions. Or to put it in more accounting terms, net worth is not an accurate measurement of the success of a person's life. And then he told a story. The ground of a certain rich man produced a good crop. The crop was so good that he could not store what he had harvested. So the solution, I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. I have years' worth of inventory of grains and goods. So I'll live on what I've got in those big new barns and take life easy from here on out. Eat, drink, and be merry. But the storyline shifts dramatically and suddenly in verse 20. But God said to him. Yes, God does get the final say. You say it's not fair, may not be fair, but that's just the way it is. We do not have the decision as to when we will depart this life. This very night, your life will be over, Jesus says to him. Then who's going to get what you've left behind? Someone will, and it obviously won't be you. This is how it will be with anyone, Jesus concludes in verse 21, who stores up things for himself, but is not rich towards God. I want you to see today the folly of bigger barns. 3 fatal errors in the fool's philosophy of life that are as modern as the day Jesus told this story. The first is he was a materialist. A materialist is a person who focuses their life on the accumulation of things. More, more, more. You'll see again that what this question that Jesus answers by telling the story is the result of Jesus capturing the sense that this man is greedy. And so he picks up on that. In verse 15, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. A man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. And then in verse 18, I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Greed is, I've got to have that. Why can't I have what the other person has? And greed consumes us so that the only thing that matters is how much we can get. Greed is like death. It is never satisfied. There's never a fill-up, a spot. If you're consumed by greed, once you've reached this particular level, the next level will emerge. And Jesus sees that and says that it is all-consuming and that it will destroy one's life. So he was a materialist. He was also, secondly, a hedonist. Webster's dictionary defines a hedonist as an ethical doctrine taught by the ancient Greeks and modern utilitarians that asserts that pleasure or happiness is the sole or chief good in life. And I will say to myself, you have plenty of good things laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. That's about as close as you can come to the creed of the 21st century. The rich man was totally focused on this life. Eat, drink, and be merry. Don't even think about death. Assume you will never die. Live for today. Which leads me to the third fallacy of this rich fool. He was a naturalist. A person who was totally orientated only towards this world and gave no thought to the world beyond this world. Again, Webster's dictionary. Relating to or operating in the physical as opposed to the spiritual world. Again, how modern is that? 2018. The rich fool never asked the question, what happens when I die? Nor did he ask the question, who's going to get all of my stuff after I die? I only had one person that ever took money to the grave. I'll tell you the story. In 1962, my dad was appointed as the pastor of the Haley Station and Renfrew Free Methodist churches. That's why I worked on Harvey Pilgrim's farm for those 3 summers as a teenager. He was a member of the congregation in Renfrew. Great memories from those 3 summers. When I went back in 1981, Dad left in 1970 to come to Frankfurt, where he pastored from 1970 to 76. During that time, I went to Roberts Wesleyan. I graduated from Roberts, went to Asbury, and then my first church after Asbury was back to the church that my dad had pastored. I went back as a pastor of a church that I left at 15 and went back at 26. Well, I had all kinds of friends I'd gone to school with. Some were in the church, some weren't in the church, but it didn't matter to me. I connected with them, had a great time reconnecting with so many friends. It was great. It was like I left at the end of grade 9 and missed all those high school connections and then go back and reconnect. One of the people I reconnected with was Bonnie McGregor. I delivered a paper on Dominion Street to her house, to her parents' house, when I was delivering Ottawa Journals and Globe and Mails. And so her dad died. No connection to the church. Didn't matter to me. Would you take my dad's funeral? And I said, absolutely I would. I delivered him paper, so I'll deliver him to his final resting place too. Bonnie said to me, my dad always had a screwdriver in one pocket and a $1 bill in the other. Now, I'm really dating myself because we did have $1 bills once upon a time. Not loonies and toonies, but we had $1 bills. We had $2 bills too. Remember those? She said my dad always had a screwdriver in one pocket and he had a $1 bill in the other pocket, and that's the way he's going to the grave. So as far as I know, Mr. McGregor is the only person that ever took money to the grave. It was a $1 bill in his left pants pocket as he lay in his casket. No one else has ever taken it, as far as I know. And no one else ever will, because it stays here. But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself?" And then this one tagline: "This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for himself." I want to look at 3 ideas in this one sentence. Stores up things. I am increasingly stunned by people who make decisions to accumulate things at the expense of their family, when not one thing will be taken with us to the world which is to come. My experience from a pastoral perspective is that when someone makes the decision that they're going to accumulate, it's the family that suffers. Now, I recognize that there are all kinds of pressures. The cost of housing, I mean, we're seeing that in the city of Peterborough right now, with houses going for prices that were just unheard of because of the way that the GTA is moving towards closer and closer to Peterborough, and the completion of 407 highway, which is going to make it even more accessible from Peterborough to the eastern side, to Durham and beyond. I understand that there are horrendous pressures, especially on young families. Mortgage payments are beyond words. They're crazy. But I think there still is a place where we make a decision that says this is enough. And that means that we do have to make choices that are sometimes very, very difficult. The storing up of things is really the ultimate form of selfishness. I must have this or that. Materialism is really a form of ego enhancement, the greatest expression of selfishness. And it's honestly, I don't think it's for the kids that we accumulate. The kids would rather play with the pots and pans. We do have at times to look at the total picture and ask the question, are we storing up things for himself? Next phrase, next 2 words. The picture Jesus paints is of a rich man whose crop is so bountiful that he has to build bigger barns to store it. For what purpose? Not to feed the poor, to take life easy, to eat, drink, and be merry. The bigger barns were built so that he could enjoy his own personal lifestyle, not care for the needs of others. He was surrounded by peasant farmers. If it had been, I'm storing up these barns like Joseph's story, so that I can help when the years of famine come, that's a different thing. But no, that he's living in the lap of luxury while no one around him is being affected in a positive way by what he's accumulating. William Barclay tells about a woman named Edith. I don't think there's anyone named Edith here this morning. I hope there isn't, because this isn't directed to you if it is. But William Barclay tells a story about a woman named Edith. Edith lived in a little world, bounded on the north, south, east, and west by Edith. That's that myself. That's focusing on me. This is how it will be with anyone who stores up things for him or herself, and then finally, but is not rich towards God. But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Who will get what you have prepared for yourself?" The most valuable possession that we have is our soul. It is the only thing that will never die. Everything else stays behind. Karen's brother, Reverend Lloyd Rainey, is pastor of the church in Forster's Falls, now called Yeah, Whitewater Wesleyan Community Church, WWCC. And of course, Lloyd is a very, very gifted speaker. He's pastored that church for 27, 28 years now, battling cancer right at this time. In a second round of cancer, he had prostate 5 years ago. He's now got a form of lymphoma, and he's in radiation at this very time at Ottawa General Hospital. Lloyd is a very gifted speaker, as I said, and some years ago he had a funeral of someone that was connected to our family, and Karen and I attended that funeral, and it was a moment that I never will forget, because I too am a speaker, as you know, a pastor, preacher, and so when he said this, I was stunned by it myself. But when he said it, I looked around to just see, well, what's happening? Well, it was stunned silence is what it was in terms of how he said this. This is what he said in the middle of this funeral service, as he was speaking about a similar kind of theme that I am this morning. He said, look at it this way. In 50 years' time, someone else's name is going to be on your bank account. It was one of those moments where it just brought everything into stark relief. This is a temporary life that we have. And Jesus says that the person who stores up things for him or herself and is not rich towards God will actually, in reality, not leave much of a legacy. Because it's my life, I will do what I want to do with it, and it doesn't matter what happens to anyone else. Not a Christian understanding of the nature of life, to be sure. Well, it's the 1st of August. The sign on the, I'm going to speak about the sign here at the church, but did you see the sign on the school this morning as you were coming in? School begins on September the 4th. Less than a month away, and I get really the 1st of August, after pastoring for 37 years. I said this to Karen just in the last 48 hours. I'm ready for the church year to begin. I'm all ready to get, like teachers, they turn the corner into August and they know that school's a month away, and they're ready to get the lesson plans going and all those kind of things. Well, for me, getting a new church year going was always a delight. I just love the thoughts of the programs coming back into place and all the things that would take place. And that's been a huge adjustment for me, a major adjustment, to not have that assignment for the 1st of August to get ready for the 1st of September. But one of the things that we did at the Peterborough Free Methodist Church was we adopted a little saying, if you like. And maybe the sign man will put this on the sign at some point. The saying was that one worship, one nurture, and one ministry experience per week created a healthy Christian and thus a healthy church. So one ministry, one worship, one nurture creates a healthy church. Now, if the goal of our life should not be the accumulation of things, then the spiritual goals kick in. And the spiritual goal has got to be tied to our own health as individual believers, which spills out and creates a healthy congregation. And so I want to suggest to you today that as we think about a new chapter that may be emerging in the life of the Madoc Wesleyan Free Methodist Church, that this would be a real good idea for us as a local church. Well, one worship, that's easy. We want to be in the Lord's house every Sunday on the Lord's Day, to be with His people and to hear what He would say to us. The nurture idea is that each one of us needs to be in some kind of a group that we can really be allowed to be transparent and to be open to the ideas of other people in our lives. Iron sharpening iron. Sunday school, small group. If you're an alone Christian, you're probably very vulnerable to all the things that are part of the culture that can seep into our lives. The third one, this ministry idea. Now, this is where the sign out here really comes in. You know, when I read this morning, I thought, now who in the world would have believed that a student at Center Hastings Secondary School would be so deeply affected by that sign? Now, let me tell you something. That sign is a ministry. One of the things that is wrong about how we do church, how we've done church, is we've said every single thing that is important in terms of the life of the body of Christ takes place within these four walls. Absolutely false. That sign is outside the four walls. It's on the church property, but it's not meant for the people in here. It's meant for the people who are driving by, who are driving to school in a school bus. I know that you're already involved. Many of you are involved in the community in a multiple number of ways. That's ministry. Is the four walls important? Yes, it is important. It's where we get the energy and the vitality and the ability to be able to share our lives outside the four walls. Absolutely, it's important. But if this congregation, and I know that this is true from reading the profile which your search committee created, has a real interest and a sense of call to be effective and to be helpful within the community in which that we reside, then that in itself is exactly the antidote for greed. Because it says, I'm thinking about what's going on outside of my life, not inside of my life. And as soon as we begin to express ourselves in those kinds of ways, God cares for us in remarkable ways. My way of saying it to my congregation over the years have been, if we care for the outside, God will look after the inside. And I really have learned that to be true. And so, as we think about a new year, as we think about a new chapter, as we get ready for the events of August the 19th, the question I have for you is on the very, very bottom of the insert that you got in your bulletin. And I think this is what the parable of the rich fool ultimately boils down to. Will the thing or the issue that has my attention now, upon which I am completely focused today, make any difference when I am gone? Let's pray. Lord, thank you so much for this story which you told, which really gets at the core of our lives today. It speaks into our life story right now, because we can so easily get caught up in the treadmill of accumulation. You would speak into that tendency, that possibility, and just say, it's not worth it. The cost is too great, both in terms of this life and the life which is to come. Only one life will soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. We thank you. In your precious name, amen.